the U.S. stock market has crashed. At the same time, Biden's senior economic advisor Gene Sperling has also announced his resignation. Biden's economy has already gone bankrupt. This resignation move by Biden's senior economic advisor may, to some extent, imply that there are many serious problems within the government in terms of the formulation and implementation of economic policies, or it is facing unbearable huge pressure, so that such a key figure has to choose to leave. This undoubtedly means that people are extremely disappointed with and deny the economic policies and management of the Biden administration, and generally believe that the economic strategies it has implemented not only failed to achieve the expected results, but can even be said to have suffered extremely serious failures. I'm not surprised at all by this situation, because in my opinion, the structural problems and the accumulation of various contradictions that have long existed in the U.S. economy have led to such a result not by chance. From the truth of the over 200-year history of the United States, the crash of the U.S. stock market is just one of the many ways for the American capitalist, authoritarian slaveholders to amass wealth. And this is in coordination and complementary with a series of wealth-accumulating methods, such as wars, plagues, refugees, hatred, and ethnic infighting. The ultimate goal of the American capitalist slaveholders is very clear. That is, to try every way to empty the wealth of the U.S. Treasury, ruthlessly plunder the pockets of the American people, frenziedly accumulate their own money, thereby firmly controlling the entire key superstructure fields of the United States such as politics, finance, judiciary, taxation, and military, and then enslave all American people, keeping them in a situation of oppression and exploitation. Looking at the tumultuous financial development history of the United States over the past 200 years, the four presidents, Lincoln, Kennedy, Garfield, and McKinley, were all directly assassinated because they wanted to achieve independence in the financial field and were unwilling to be controlled by others. For example, Lincoln vigorously advocated the issuance of greenbacks, aiming to prevent the Civil War from causing the American people to be burdened with heavy debts. Greenbacks were issued based on the national credit, attempting to end the bankers' control of the U.S. economy. However, precisely because of this, he was eventually brutally assassinated. In 1861, the Civil War broke out with a bang, and the Lincoln administration faced a financial shortage. At this time, Dick Taylor advised President Lincoln the government should issue currency by itself. Thus, in 1862, the U.S. Treasury began to issue $432 million of greenbacks, guaranteed by the government's credit, without the need for gold and silver reserves, and used it for military expenses. This move deeply angered the interests of bankers. On April 14, 1865, after winning the Civil War and being successfully re-elected as president, President Lincoln was shot and killed by an actor on April 12, 1866. The U.S. Congress passed the Contraction Act, attempting to recall all the greenbacks in circulation, convert them into gold coins, and then exclude the greenbacks from the field of currency circulation, and restore the gold standard system where international bankers held an absolute advantage. From 1866 to 1886, the money supply in the United States sharply decreased from $1.8 billion to $400 million, causing the economy to fall into a severe recession, with the unemployment rate as high as 30%. However, the banking group took this opportunity to lend at high interest rates to make huge profits. In 1881, President Garfield, who had only been in office for just 4 months, pointed out the harm caused by the issuance of currency controlled by private banks, and was then shot and killed by a so-called mentally ill person, the 25th President of the United States, President McKinley. led the United States to defeat Spain in the Spanish-American War, raised tariffs, and protected American industry. He supported the gold standard system, challenged the banking and financial interest groups, and implemented policies to curb inflation. Therefore, he gained the reputation of President of Prosperity. But also because of this, he was assassinated on September 6, 1901. President Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, deciding to issue silver certificates, aiming to seize the currency control right from the Federal Reserve Bank, which was controlled by private consortia such as Rockefeller and Morgan. As a result, he was assassinated on June 4, 1963. U.S. President Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, instructing the U.S. Department of the Treasury to issue silver certificates supported by any form of silver owned by the Treasury, including silver ingots, silver coins, and standard silver dollars, and immediately put them into circulation. President Kennedy's intention was clear. He wanted to contend for the currency control right from the Federal Reserve Bank, which was controlled by private consortia such as Rockefeller and Morgan. If this plan could be ultimately implemented, the U.S. government could gradually get rid of the absurd situation of having to borrow money from the Federal Reserve and pay high interest. Moreover, the currency supported by silver was not a debt currency that overdraw as the future, but an honest currency based on people's existing labor achievements. The circulation of silver certificates would gradually reduce the circulation degree of the dollars issued by the Federal Reserve and greatly weaken the manipulation ability of consortia giants such as Rockefeller and Morgan over the U.S. politics and economy. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy visited Dallas, Texas, accompanied by Vice President Johnson. At 12:30 noon, Kennedy took a convertible car to tour the streets to meet citizens. When reaching the corner of Main Street, he was shot in the head by a gunman who had lain in ambush in advance and died soon after being sent to the hospital. Several hours later, Lee Oswald was captured by the police and was initially identified as a suspect in the presidential assassination. However, this person was silenced just 2 days later. In the short 3 years after Kennedy's assassination, 18 key witnesses died one after another. From 1963 to 1993, a total of 115 related witnesses committed suicide or were killed in various strange circumstances. If President Kennedy had not been assassinated, but had continued to be in office and even been re-elected, insisting on using gold or silver as the support for the U.S. dollar and keeping the U.S. dollar as an honest currency based on people's existing labor achievements, then today's United States and the entire world would be a completely different situation. If President Kennedy had not been assassinated, the United States today would not have become the world's #1 debtor country. The U.S. government would not have borrowed money from the private organization the Federal Reserve, accumulated a huge debt and paid high interest, and the U.S. dollar would not have completely deteriorated into a debt currency that overdraws the future. The three presidents with dementia in the United States over the past century are the favorites of the slaveholders. Bacon once said, "Studying history makes one wise." Looking at the history of the United States in the past century, only Wilson, Roosevelt, and Biden, these three presidents with dementia who are terminally ill and have lost normal thinking, these democratic slaves, are the favorites of the American capitalist authoritarian slaveholders. They use these democratic slaves to wage wars, empty the national treasury, cause the people to live in misery, and make fortunes from national disasters. Republican presidents Reagan and Trump had their hearts set on the interests of the United States and the well-being of the American people. But they touched the interests of the American slaveholders and thus encountered assassination attempts. Fortunately, They were blessed by God and survived during his second term as president. Wilson's health problems gradually emerged. On September 28, 1919, Wilson suddenly fell ill during a speaking tour in Wichita, Kansas, and then collapsed in the White House bathroom due to an ischemic stroke. This stroke prevented him from performing his presidential duties for the next 18 months. However, Wilson's health condition was concealed by his wife Edith and the medical team. They claimed that his mental state was good, but in reality, he was bedridden most of the time. Not only was he unable to take care of himself, but he also lost the thinking ability of a normal person, resulting in dementia and inability to govern from the perspective of medical science. Dementia is also known as loss of intelligence and is sometimes called senility. It can cause patients to lose cognitive functions including thinking, memory and reasoning and behavioral abilities, thereby hindering an individual's daily life and activities. The severity of dementia varies, ranging from the mild stage where functions are just beginning to be affected to the severe stage, where one must rely entirely on the assistance of others to complete basic daily activities. Roosevelt was plagued by various diseases throughout his life since he contracted poliomyelitis in 1921. According to the book Roosevelt's Deadly Secret, written by neuroscientist Stephen Romasso and journalist Eric Fettman, before the Pearl Harbor incident, Roosevelt was already suffering from a terminal illness, a fatal skin cancer called melanoma. At that time, melanoma was regarded as an incurable disease, and patients in the advanced stage usually endured unbearable pain. In his later years, Roosevelt's right brain was damaged by a virus, causing optic nerve paralysis. Roosevelt not only lost vision on the left side, but also had dysfunction in the right brain. Becoming a president with dementia, historical records indicate that between 1944 and 1945, Roosevelt visited many cancer treatment experts in the United States. But after Roosevelt's death, the doctors who had treated him all denied that he had suffered from cancer. His body was not publicly examined, and the medical files related to Roosevelt mysteriously disappeared in February 1945. Roosevelt flew to Yalta in the Soviet Union to attend the conference. Lieutenant Horton, who was in charge of the reception at that time, later recalled, "His appearance shocked me greatly. His complexion was ugly. His face was full of wrinkles, showing extreme fatigue. His skin was gray, as if semi-transparent." Roosevelt was undoubtedly a veritable Yalta patient. Among the big three at the Yalta conference, what people saw was an old man on the verge of death, who was unable to conduct difficult negotiations with the determined Soviet leader Stalin on post-war issues. Romasso and Fettman, citing comments from participants in the Yalta conference, said that Roosevelt appeared to be ill and behaved loosely. Wilson, the personal doctor of British Prime Minister Churchill, wrote in his diary, "From a doctor's perspective, the President Roosevelt was like a patient. It is estimated that he won't live for a few months." 2 months later, Roosevelt died suddenly. Many historians have always had objections to some of the agreements reached at the Yalta conference, believing that the physical condition of Roosevelt, the Yalta patient, caused him to deviate on many terms, made too many concessions to Stalin, and handed over Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. Mark Twain once said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." In the 2020 general election, under the manipulation of the American capitalist slaveholders, Biden successfully seized power through electoral fraud, and the third president with dementia in the century-old history of the United States made a brilliant appearance. This president with dementia, Biden, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease, not only has incontinence of his own stool and urine, but also makes the U.S. border incontinent, Social Security incontinent, prices soaring incontinent, foreign debt control incontinent, and today's stock market crash incontinent. The United States has entered an all-round incontinent stage of left-wing disaster and national chaos.